What do we find at the intersection of faith and the world? The Cathedral's podcast, Crossroads, explores this question in thought-provoking bi-monthly episodes, featuring guests from around the world who are seeking to live faithfully in the public square. This is a safe space for tough questions around faith, politics, technology, and our responsibilities as citizens. So pull up a chair and meet us as we search for a better way forward. Welcome to Crossroads, where we discuss the intersection of sacred and civic. I'm your host, Nygard Owens. Today, I am sitting down with two masters of their crafts, painter and sculptor Chaz Fagan and cathedral stone carver Sean Callahan. Chaz was the official White House portraitist for First Lady Barbara Bush. He also painted the official canonization portrait of Mother Teresa, sculpted a 7-foot statue of Ronald Reagan that stands in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, and he has created the sculptures that form many of the cathedral's most recent carvings. We're here to talk to Chaz and Sean about the newest cathedral carving, St. Phoebe. Okay, so we're going to start with questions for you, Chaz, because we want to know more about you. So tell us about yourself, how you came to be a painter and a sculptor, and how you came to do such amazing work in such prominent places.
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that.
I think you can.
It's a completely nonlinear path.
As they are.
Unpredicted path. My degree was Soviet studies.
Okay.
And studied in Leningrad. And when I came back, though, I changed everything and totally changed gear. Went back to what I had been doing all through college, which was cartoons, political cartoons. And the city paper had paid me, which was the key. And so I figured I might be able to survive that way. And then did that, loved it, got lucky, was syndicated, had a blast, but then responsibilities grew and I got married and kids started to come and I needed more and I did illustrations and then paintings and more paintings and they became portraits and it just grew and grew. And then the sculpting happened with a project for C-SPAN.
Oh, tell us about that.
It started with an illustration for a magazine of Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville. Just an assignment. I did it. And then when it hit the stands, I got phone calls from C-SPAN to come and pitch to do an image because they were going to be doing a 1.5-year program on Tocqueville. And with that, I pitched and I got the job to do a portrait of Tocqueville. It all fell apart. The quick version is I had to go back to DC, pitch again. And this time I walked out with a contract, but it was for a sculpture of Tocqueville. And I had not touched clay since the 3rd grade.
And those are very different processes.
You would think, but I had to learn fast, very fast, because it was a TV deadline too. And that was my very first sculpture.
Wow.
So it just happened. So that it is hard to answer those questions. You could say.
No, but it is. That's how so many stories happen, is there isn't this linear path. There are these moments that leapfrog you from one point to another that you can never predict, never plan for, but that's what ends up happening. So what happened after that sculpture?
Well, it was C-SPAN, so television, so that's great publicity. And then I did some interviews and things, and they thought it was just so much fun. And next thing you know, when they're doing their entire tour across the United States, they showed up at my door in Philadelphia with the C-SPAN bus. And it was a live TV program from my studio was so small, they had to build a extra platform on my stairs to back up the TV. It was before digital. So it was just kind of silly, but that started a little more momentum in that direction.
Well, how did you come to sculpt for the cathedral?
Equally random. My very first life-size sculpture was for a town in Pennsylvania called Greensburg of Nathaniel Greene. I loved that piece, but it was the only thing I had. So I made a card of it, like a little publicity postcard type thing, and tried to distribute that. And apparently someone at the cathedral got a hold of one of those and put that on the table somewhere. And then my name was suddenly in the hat.
Oh, I love
So
it.
completely random.
Well, I just have to pause and say I used to live in Greensboro, North Carolina, also named after Nathaniel Greene. Near and dear to our hearts, those who live in Greensboro.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what was your first piece at the cathedral?
The very first ones were the 3 at the Sedilia.
Okay.
So full figure, full sculptures,
Mm-hmm.
but separate, and that they could be carved elsewhere. So they were to be placed on these platform niches that already existed,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the assignment. John Donne, George Herbert, and Howard Thurman.
Mm-hmm. And when did you and Sean start working together?
What year was that? Maybe 2007?
I was going to ask you, so
Well,
We can ballpark it.
I came back here in 2005,
Okay.
and they were just installing those Sedalia statues when I came back. And then he got the commission to do the half-boss stone in the Human Rights Porch.
yes.
So that was a couple of years later. I think it was around 2007. So basically, yeah, Chaz did a mock of a painting, then a clay maquette, and then I didn't know anyone here at the time when I came back. I came back as a mason, so
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had to prove them that I was a carver as well. So I actually I carved it almost twice. I did a preliminary in the shop to make sure I could do the work. And then once I said, okay, we're satisfied, then I did it in situ in the bay, working in the ceiling.
What is that like? To me, the pressure of that would just feel extreme.
I guess there's pressure, but you just take your time. You guys got to be careful. Yeah, you're always worried about doing something wrong, but if you just take a methodical, deliberate approach, and usually works out. If you make any little mistakes, they usually can be mitigated. But
Okay.
that one went pretty well. So I don't remember having any real issues with that.
But for those who, you can't see it right now, but I mean, so a boss stone is that stone at the top
Mhm.
of
Like
the,
analogous to a keystone in an arch.
exactly. So it's got
but it's
these
in a vault.
these ribs that go up and dead end into it, and that is the structure that holds up what's below. So the assignment was to sculpt something in depth, so bas relief, to make it look like a landscape with figures and everything, but just based on the stone that existed. And oh, by the way, kind of try to stay away from where the meat of the stone is still needed for structure, where those ribs come in. So, from the artistic side, it's one thing to think of how to make it look three-dimensional and with some depth and all that kind of stuff, like an actual landscape. But it's the other to actually to try to avoid the basic things that you cannot dig deep in this area. So those thoughts were important to me. But what Sean just brushed by was the word, in situ. He's
Mhm.
sculpting up in the air, a la
I
Michelangelo.
was just thinking that, yeah.
And I remember my favorite visit at one point, I walk in, there's a scaffold and you don't see anything. There's a scaffold and it's kind of obscuring what's up there. And I'm wondering what's happening. And then next thing I hear is clink, 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 clink. Oh, Sean is working away.
Yeah, we had a tarp around the scaffold so this tourist wouldn't distract me and I wouldn't distract them. And
Sure.
otherwise they'd be asking questions all the time. I'd never get anything done. So
And you don't want little bits of rock and things
Right.
falling down on people. But yes, you're right. You would never get anything done.
yeah, because scaffold's only about 5 feet off the ground. So people will be right there looking because that's where all the visitors come in that side. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
So I have to cover it up.
And we'll get some pictures and link to pictures in our show notes so that folks can see this boss stone and other works, the Sedalia, and we'll talk about it. What are some of the other pieces that you've done at the cathedral?
Also, the same area as the boss stone and the narthex, there are stones for me from the outside. There were these blocks of stone that had been up there for 100 years
Mm-hmm.
and that they held up arches themselves. So they're structural, but they're just
Mhm.
these blocks. And then the idea was to instead of just decorate them with vegetative, decorative things that you all do all the time, was to actually do likenesses. And so they came up with 4, and we did one at a time, and they were incredible projects. And something again that Sean won't mention is the most important thing for me, the most powerful thing that he gave me was a 3D template of those blocks, including where the architectural structure hits them.
Oh,
And so forever, and their folding and they're hard. It was a beautiful template, I've got to tell you. So it was a 3D thing where I could fold it and it could flap it around. So which meant that at any moment when I was in doubt as to what I was sculpting on a face, trying to squeeze this head so it doesn't quite fit, but I have to make it fit into the meat of the stone, I could just pull out that template and see, am I still within limits? It was just great. It was like the ultimate crutch.
So for people listening, you have a molding over the arch of the doorway, and at the bottom of the arch, they're termination stones are called. So they cover up where the molding ends, and they project out from the wall.
Mhm.
And like he says, they weren't meant for portraits originally; they were meant for some type of floral motif. And so the blocks were very awkward to fit a human face in, but he made it work. That was an impressive thing because I was like, how's he going to do this? But so he angled a certain way and had him looking down, and it fit the space well because the blocks were wider than they were tall, which is the opposite of what you want for a portrait.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And so he solved that very well.
And tell us who was carved.
First was Mother Teresa. And then we did Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks and Mother Teresa were kind of the same. We did those consecutively, like in 2010. And then a few years later, did Jonathan Myrick Daniels, who was the
seminarian.
In Selma. And then Episcopal seminarian. And then actually during COVID, we did the Elie Wiesel.
Oh, okay.
So the place was kind of shut down when I did that one. And they were tricky because he had to make them where the molding and there's a column capital that both intersect with that stone. So he had to get a sense of how that's going to intersect with the face. So I had to, as well as make the initial pattern, when we had to take a casting of the wall. So we had to, and then when the maquette was done in clay, then he had to come back and I had the casting of the wall. So he had to place the face in the casting of the wall that I did. And we had to hollow out that blocks and make sure it fit. Then we had to put it up on the wall to make sure the light was correct. It was very, and we had to make a third casting of the casting of the face and the casting of the wall together. So I could then copy it in place.
Wow. I don't think anyone who is not involved in this type of craft work would have any idea just how many steps.
The prep work was almost as laborious as the carving.
Sounds like it. So what was it like for both of you? Because you're bringing these historical figures to life in these carvings. What is it like to do that? How do you get to know a person that way?
Yeah, that is the world I live in. So it's kind of, I guess I never grew up. I don't know, a little bit of imagination overflow. But so for posthumous portraits like this, it's just really fun to do research and find out what they're like and see if you can just imagine them in front of you when you're sculpting. And so
do you have conversations with them?
Not that I know of, although portraits, I got to say, with actually painted portraits, I think I do. So, because they're in the studio for so long, they become kind of your friends.
Sure. My books become my friends. When I'm teaching classes and referencing different books, I have conversations with all of the books. So I do understand.
It's there. Yeah, hard to admit, but it's true. But no, research, lots of it. And then we totally collaborate, which I love. But there is a complete mental barrier between my world and his world, because my world, I make so many mistakes. All I do is correct. I'm always adjusting. I'm pushing clay in different directions, paint, whatever. And so I can relax in that, and I know that I can always change things. And I'll just try this big stroke and see what happens. And if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, try something else. And that is completely out the window when it comes to Sean's world, where just the idea of, so I do additive sculpting.
And I do subtractive.
You do subtractive. Yeah. And it's just you're discovering it inside the stone, and I'm trying to make it out of a blob.
Right.
So it's really fun. Total collaboration.
I love it. I love it. Sean, what is it like for you when you're creating these likenesses? Do you have conversations or do the figures come to life for you in different ways?
Well, you're getting to know their face. And while you're doing it, you're just kind of absorbing their story. Not actively thinking about it necessarily, but it's just there in front of you. And it's carving's like a kind of almost a meditative act. So sometimes you're just doing it. And before you know it, the time is gone. And so when you're in that mode, it's a good place for working. But yeah, I mean, I know these people a lot better, their stories a lot better just from working on them. Like a carving takes a couple months. So you have all that time, you're there with that person in front of you. So you of course you're going to become involved with their story, but I don't know if I actively think about it, but it's difficult to explain.
One of the things that I talk about a lot is how things sink into us. And so it's not necessarily that active process,
right,
but it's the passive process of how that knowledge and that being sinks into you and becomes living within inside of you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. It's just you kind of soak it in. Yeah, it's not an active process. It's more of more of a passive thing.
So the executing, though, also, you said, you get it in this meditative state. And the execution of it, though, is also kind of passive mentally sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that real. I mean, where I purposely try to turn off my brain and just go.
The flow
Because
state.
you can just go.
Yeah.
And not be distracted, not overthink, and processes. And for me, I guess in painting, especially because it's more thought on process. I really try to simplify it completely and forget it all and just
Instinctual
let
versus
it go.
technical.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. I have artists in my house, so we talk about these things. So we brought you here today because we have a new carving which will be installed in the cathedral, and that is Saint Phoebe. So tell us a little bit more about Saint Phoebe. How did this come to be? Where will she live? What has the process been?
Well, I think it was Randy's brainchild.
Okay.
I believe.
I think so. That's what I've heard also.
The admission is that I did not know Saint Phoebe.
A lot of people don't.
I didn't know her either.
And so that was kind of fun. The idea that St. Paul had an assistant that would actually do all the trekking and traveling and delivering of the letters that we know so well. That was cool to visualize. But then there's, also some hypotheses that there was maybe some writing involved from her too. That's also kind of fun to visualize. So you put that all together, and then you do what I always do, which is just the research side, and you try to find if a knowledgeable person of the various saints were to see this figure, would they be able to recognize the figure as the Saint Phoebe? And that is kind of easy when it comes to really old saints because, you've had them reproduced and represented in various ways. And eventually they get their own language. So eventually they get their visual language that means, yes, this is Saint so-and-so. But I was searching for something really fun to sculpt like that. And then St. Phoebe's is actually very basic. So it was a cross and a scroll, or a cross and something written. And that is it. Otherwise, there's really no other visuals associated with her.
Oh, interesting.
So they became the essentials.
Excellent. And we will certainly include pictures in our show notes of Phoebe, and hopefully of Phoebe when she is installed into the cathedral. But a little bit more background. You find out about Phoebe in Paul's letter to the Romans. When we think about the role of women in the church, we forget about the early church. And in Jesus's time, he really lifted up the role of women and saw them as full disciples. But in the early church, women were very, very involved. They had roles of leadership. Paul used Phoebe in the role of a leader, and it was only when Christianity was kind of solidified under Constantine that women were subjugated so much, but they were leaders. And I really appreciate that Randy is lifting up how women can be in the church. And that's so important to us at the cathedral. We've done a whole episode on the role of women in the church and the role of women here at the cathedral. So we'll link to that episode as well. One of the things that we love about the cathedral with all of its iconography is that it is a living, breathing story. That as you walk around, you can hear and see the story of Christianity, the story of the church, and at our cathedral, the story of our nation. How do you think about that as you're carving these pieces and adding them to the iconography of the cathedral?
I always do. The idea of a cathedral is that kind of ability to communicate larger lessons. And some of them are visuals, from the windows to the decorative elements. It's not just words. And obviously the sounds, the organ, all those things are all communicating something larger. And I love that. And the idea of doing things like this it helps in that vein. So now we're introducing St. Phoebe. But the other thing is on the very personal side, I love the idea of someone arriving in a space and figuring out where they're going to look, how they're going to interact with things. And in this case, her niche is going to be relatively low. And so there will be a chance for absolute one-on-one interaction, even though it's a little tiny, small sculpture, but it's right there for people to see. And I think that was really intriguing on this one because it's not a stone that's already there. We're able to design it as we wish. And a lot of flow and actually the placing of it was really fun and trying to maximize that impact of her with her S-curve figure.
So tell us, where will she be?
She'll be in the parclose screen.
What does that mean?
It's a screen of separation. In the case here, it's to the left of the main altar
Okay.
in the north transept. There's a screen that shields the steps that go down to the crypt. So it's the parclose steps.
Okay. So if people head to the north transept to the stairs that go down to the crypt, they'll be able to find her.
Correct. There's four older sculptures above
Mm-hmm.
overhead as you go under the arch into the stairway.
Mm-hmm.
She'll be to the right of the doorway.
Wonderful. Every time I have these conversations, I just want to walk through the cathedral again and again and investigate and look at things in new ways. And that's what's amazing about the cathedral or any place like this. There's always something new to learn and to see and to interact with in a new way. And the more you know, the more it means. I love that this is taking two very traditional mediums, sculpting and carving, and we don't find carving so much anymore, and using the cathedral as a place to carry on that craft and that tradition. Just thank you for your work, Sean.
Well, I learned here. So I think you always have people that want to carve.
Mm-hmm.
The problem now is finding a place to learn, and you just need time. So I was fortunate that the cathedral was still being built when I learned. So I had an actual apprenticeship, and now it's hard to find those. You need a place like a cathedral being built to have a big enough crew where you can get ideas from other people around you and learn the craft that way. Now it's a lot of times it's a classroom. You just don't get the time. You need time on the material to really learn it well, and that's the challenge nowadays. But I think there's always people. I know I just want to learn the medium, and there's people like that nowadays coming up that just want to learn, and they'll come and we want to have the scale of the work to support a big apprenticeship like that now,
Yeah.
and that's something to think about in the future, how we can keep the trade going.
For sure. So, and we did talk a little bit about it, but how has historical knowledge, as you, and you talked about really researching the people that you have painted and sculpt, how has that really played into your work?
If the subjects are fitting, so if the subjects are what I just think of as fun, so American history, especially some European, if there is that great subject, then the goal for me is to tell the story. And so you can't tell it without knowing it. So you got to research it, and you can't really convey someone's presence without knowing who they were. So you got to do some research, and it can be fun. Like I did a Joan of Arc at one point. Not a large one yet, but that was just for fun, and tons of great research down to the actual armor. How you could form the armor properly to fit a female form and make it historically true. I mean, so instead of just faking it, I really want to find out how to do it. And so it gets to be the little details. But for every person, it's the same thing. And then knowing the context to be able to tell the story.
And I understand that you're in DC today for the unveiling of the Barbara Bush commemorative stamp that you painted the portrait for.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Oh, well, the Barbara Bush portrait is the one that hangs in the White House. And that in and of itself was a total surprise when it happened, because I was asked just yesterday the technicalities of the process, and I knew nothing. I still know nothing of it because it all just happened by surprise. Where I did a portrait, I competed for a portrait of Barbara Bush in New York, and I got it, and I did it, and unveiled it with her there, and it was at the end of her speech. I'm there with my wife, and we're having a great lunch, and she just announces that, oh, and by the way, Mr. Fagan will be helping us with another painting. And that perked my ears, but I had no idea what she was talking about. So that was the genesis of the portrait that's in the White House. And then for the stamp, it's already been, I looked back at my emails, I think it's already been maybe 2 years that this has been kind of cooking. It takes a while, but there was challenges of how do you reduce a portrait to something super, super small and still convey the person.
Wonderful. So we end our podcast episodes talking about hope. And so I'm curious, with the sculptures, with the paintings, with all of your work and your skill and your craft, Sean, how do these sculptures provide hope for those who come to the cathedral? And what can they learn through this embodiment?
Well, for me, the cathedral is just an awe-inspiring place, and something that it's timeless. You come in and you get inspired by all these people's stories, whether it be priests or martyrs, but they all work towards like something bigger than yourself. When I come to a cathedral, it's just like you're part of something bigger, and that's kind of like a hopeful thing for me. But yeah, you just look up at the space, and everywhere you look, there's details, and every time you come to the cathedral, you can see new things you haven't seen before, and it just sets a spiritual mood that it just makes you feel good. I don't know if I
That's
explain that right.
perfect. Thank you, Sean. How about you, Chaz?
Thinking more of the kind of the historical continuity. So Europe had a big head start with a church building, et cetera, with the same purpose in a time when visuals were the communication. And then here in the U.S., a new country, and yet we're still continuing with the tradition of building a cathedral. And that when I was a little kid, I was just amazed. You know, I grew up in Belgium, and I see these cathedrals, and I get to the U.S. and we come visit the cathedral being built. Like, wow, wait, they're building these stone on stone. So that for me is just makes me happy that that historical continuity is flowing right here. The other thing that hits me when you say hope is the cathedral here is demonstrating the crafts. So demonstrating the old crafts that were so valuable, and they still are. I think, you know, so when I'm here, it's the happiest moments for me ever, because I get to hang out with people who do incredible crafts, and it's a rare thing.
And also the building itself lives beyond you. It's just it's going to go down the generations and keep telling that story and inspiring more people.
And when you come here, we are very intentional about saying this is your national cathedral. And the cathedral has such a living presence that when you walk in, you feel immediately that you belong. And so you are a part of this history and this story that is so much bigger than ourselves, but yet we do have a place there.
The uniqueness of this cathedral, though, with the inclusion of American history, so kind of the American cultural imagery, because every culture used their own, and we're using our own. But I've encountered lots of people who wonder, what are they doing? I mean, why would you possibly include these, other imagery? Like, well, that is the environment we're in.
The intersection of sacred and civic. That's where we live.
And also seeing how the iconography evolves through the culture changes and
true.
And the artwork reflects that. And that's so you'll curious to see what's going to happen in the future as things change. So
exactly. All right. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Chaz, for spending time with us this morning out of your busy schedule. We're glad that we could catch you when you were in DC today.
Perfect. Delighted to be here.
And thank you, Sean, for joining us. We're always happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
I hope you will join us for our next episode when we take an opportunity to reflect on some of the history that shapes us as a nation, especially as we draw close to this year's Juneteenth remembrance. Thank you for listening to Crossroads, and until next time, peace be with you. If the digital offerings of the cathedral enrich your daily life, please consider becoming a supporter today by making a gift at cathedral.org/inspire.